Domitian, the last emperor of the Flavian dynasty, remains one of the most polarizing figures in Roman history. His rule, which lasted from 81 to 96 AD, was marked by a mix of administrative efficiency, military ambition, and increasing authoritarianism. While his reign contributed significantly to the stability and infrastructure of the Roman Empire, his autocratic tendencies and strained relationship with the Senate have led to a lasting reputation as a ruthless despot. Understanding Domitian's significance requires exploring not just his policies and governance but also the broader historical context in which he ruled. The Flavian dynasty was established by his father, Vespasian, in 69 AD, following a year of political chaos known as the Year of the Four Emperors. This period of instability, which saw the rapid succession of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius before Vespasian's rise, underscored the fragility of imperial rule. Vespasian restored order and focused on economic recovery, military strength, and large-scale public works. He was succeeded by his elder son, Titus, in 79 AD, who, though popular for his generosity and handling of disasters such as the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, ruled for only 2 years before his untimely death. Domitian, often overshadowed by his father and brother, then ascended the throne, marking the final phase of Flavian rule. At the time of Domitian's rise, Rome was still consolidating its power after the civil strife that had followed the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The empire was vast and increasingly difficult to manage, with pressures from both external enemies and internal political factions. The Senate, while still a prestigious institution, had largely lost its influence over governance, as emperors continued to centralize power. The Roman economy, reliant on conquest, trade, and taxation, needed careful management to prevent inflation and resource depletion. Furthermore, military conflicts on multiple frontiers, particularly in Germania and Dacia, posed challenges that required strong leadership. Domitian's reign can be understood through 4 key themes: absolute rule, military expansion, economic policy, and persecution. Unlike his predecessors, who at least maintained the illusion of senatorial cooperation, Domitian adopted a more openly autocratic approach. He believed in the divine authority of the emperor and sought to transform the principate into a fully centralized monarchy. This led to increased control over the administration, a restructuring of the military, and significant conflicts with the Senate, which resented his efforts to curb its power. His insistence on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, reflected his view of the emperor's role as an unquestioned sovereign, a stance that put him at odds with Rome's traditional elite. Militarily, Domitian focused on securing Rome's borders and strengthening its defensive capabilities. His campaigns against the Chatti in Germania and his confrontations with the Dacians demonstrated his commitment to maintaining Rome's military dominance. However, his strategy was often defensive rather than expansionist, prioritizing fortified frontiers and stability over reckless conquest. The settlement with Dacia, which involved paying tributes to King Decebalus, was seen as a controversial move as it contrasted with Rome's usual stance of total military superiority. Nonetheless, Domitian's military policies contributed to long-term security in key regions of the empire. Economically, Domitian took measures to stabilize Rome's financial system. He reformed the currency, strengthened provincial administration, and imposed strict financial policies to curb corruption. His building projects, including the completion of the Colosseum and the construction of roads, temples, and aqueducts, contributed to the empire's infrastructure and showcased his commitment to public works. However, these expenditures, coupled with the costs of maintaining a strong military, placed financial strain on the treasury, leading to increased taxation and unpopular fiscal policies. Perhaps one of the most controversial aspects of Domitian's rule was his persecution of perceived enemies, including senators, philosophers, and Christians. He saw opposition as a threat to his authority and carried out purges to eliminate dissent. The exile of Stoic philosophers, who advocated for republican ideals, and the execution of numerous senators created a climate of fear in Rome. Additionally, although evidence is debated, some sources suggest that Domitian targeted early Christians, viewing them as subversive elements within the empire. His use of informers and the widespread atmosphere of suspicion contributed to his growing unpopularity among the elite. Despite his administrative achievements, Domitian's increasing paranoia and autocratic tendencies led to his downfall. In 96 AD, he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy involving members of his court, the Praetorian Guard, and possibly even his wife, Domitia Longina. His death marked the end of the Flavian dynasty, and the Senate, eager to erase his memory, declared a damnatio memoriae, ordering the removal of his name from inscriptions and statues. His successor, Nerva, sought to restore senatorial influence and distance himself from Domitian's reign. Over time, historical assessments of Domitian have varied. Ancient historians such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger, who were largely from the senatorial class, depicted him as a cruel tyrant. However, modern scholarship has re-evaluated his rule, acknowledging his administrative capabilities, military efforts, and economic reforms. While he undoubtedly ruled with an iron fist, his reign provided stability that benefited the empire in the long run. His governance set precedents that later emperors, particularly those of the 2nd century, would adopt in refining imperial authority. Domitian's legacy remains complex. He was a ruler who sought to strengthen Rome but did so through absolute control, earning both admiration and hatred. His contributions to the empire's infrastructure, economy, and military were significant, yet his persecution of opposition and authoritarian style ensured his vilification by Rome's elite. Whether he was a despotic tyrant or a pragmatic leader depends on perspective, but his reign remains a pivotal chapter in the history of imperial Rome. Domitian was born in 51 AD into the Flavian family, a relatively modest but rising Roman lineage. His father, Vespasian, was an experienced military commander, while his mother, Domitilla the Elder, came from a background that, though respectable, lacked the aristocratic prestige of Rome's long-established senatorial families. Domitian had an older sister, Domitilla the Younger, and an older brother, Titus, with whom he shared a complex relationship throughout his life. While Vespasian was occupied with his military and political career, Domitian spent much of his early years away from the grand stage of Roman politics, receiving an education that, though befitting a noble Roman, lacked the rigor and prestige of the schooling his elder brother experienced. Titus, being the elder son, was naturally groomed for leadership. He received extensive military training and was given important responsibilities at an early age. Domitian, by contrast, spent much of his youth in relative obscurity, often overshadowed by his more accomplished brother. The difference in their upbringing was stark. Titus studied under renowned tutors, had the opportunity to serve in military campaigns, and formed close relationships with influential figures. Domitian, on the other hand, was left with fewer responsibilities and limited public exposure. While he received an education in rhetoric and philosophy, he lacked the battlefield experience and administrative grooming that often defined Rome's future leaders. This dynamic played a crucial role in shaping his personality, instilling in him both a sense of inferiority and an unyielding ambition to prove himself. The political climate during Domitian's early years was dominated by the reign of Emperor Nero. Nero's rule was characterized by excess, artistic indulgence, and increasing paranoia, which led to the execution and exile of many prominent Romans. The Flavian family, though not yet at the center of power, managed to navigate this dangerous environment with caution. Vespasian, having served as a military commander in Britain and Judea, maintained a pragmatic distance from the intrigues of Nero's court. He was known for his practical and disciplined nature, which allowed him to survive a regime that was notorious for its capriciousness. However, as Nero's rule became more unstable, Rome itself plunged into uncertainty. In 68 AD, a widespread revolt against Nero's tyranny erupted, leading to his forced suicide. This event ushered in what became known as the Year of the Four Emperors, a period of intense civil war that saw the rapid rise and fall of multiple claimants to the imperial throne. Galba initially seized power but was soon overthrown by Otho, who in turn was defeated by Vitellius. Throughout this chaos, Vespasian, who was commanding Roman legions in Judea, emerged as a formidable contender. Domitian, though still young and largely untested, found himself thrust into a position of unexpected prominence. When Vespasian declared himself emperor in 69 AD, he left the administration of Rome in the hands of his allies while continuing to fight for control over the empire. Domitian, who had previously lived a relatively quiet life, was suddenly at the center of Rome's political stage. As Vitellius's forces clashed with Vespasian's supporters, Domitian was forced to flee for safety, taking refuge with his relatives. When Vespasian's forces finally triumphed, Domitian entered Rome as the de facto representative of the Flavian cause, an extraordinary moment that marked his first real taste of power. With his father still engaged in military campaigns abroad, Domitian was given certain ceremonial duties in Rome. The Senate, eager to align itself with the victorious Flavian faction, granted him the title of Caesar and accorded him various honors. However, despite these titles, Domitian wielded little actual power. His role was largely symbolic, serving as a figurehead for his father's cause rather than a true decision-maker. Still, this period provided Domitian with an early understanding of political maneuvering, courtly intrigue, and the importance of securing military loyalty, lessons that would shape his later reign. Once Vespasian formally assumed the imperial throne, the administrative structure of Rome was reorganized to consolidate Flavian authority. Titus, as the eldest son and heir apparent, was given substantial responsibilities. He became his father's right-hand man, overseeing key aspects of governance, commanding military campaigns, and solidifying his reputation as the empire's future leader. Domitian, by contrast, was relegated to a secondary role, receiving only minor administrative assignments. The sidelining of Domitian during his father's reign became a source of deep frustration. While Vespasian and Titus worked closely together in shaping the empire's policies, Domitian was largely excluded from meaningful participation. He was given no military command, no governorship, and no significant responsibilities beyond those that were purely ceremonial. This created a growing resentment within him, fostering a sense of alienation from both his father and brother. Unlike Titus, who had earned the respect of the Senate and military alike, Domitian remained an outsider, a prince without a clear role or purpose. Despite this, Domitian did not remain entirely idle. He observed the workings of government, studied the actions of those in power, and quietly developed his own vision of how the empire should be ruled. He became increasingly aware of the tensions between the Senate and the imperial office, noting how his father skillfully managed the balance between autocracy and senatorial appeasement. He also witnessed firsthand the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard and the legions, understanding that military support was crucial for maintaining power. While he may not have been directly involved in decision-making, Domitian absorbed the mechanics of governance in a way that would later influence his own leadership style. Titus's reign, though promising, was brief. Following Vespasian's death in 79 AD, Titus ascended the throne and quickly garnered popularity due to his generosity and effective leadership. However, his time as emperor was cut short when he died suddenly in 81 AD, under circumstances that some speculated to be suspicious. Domitian, who had long felt overshadowed, now found himself in a position he had long yearned for. With his brother's unexpected demise, the path to absolute power was finally open. Unlike his father and brother, who had governed with at least some level of senatorial cooperation, Domitian took a markedly different approach. Having spent years in the background, observing the politics of Rome without active participation, he had developed his own vision for the empire, one that emphasized centralized authority, military strength, and a clear separation between the emperor and the traditional elite. His rise to power was immediate and uncontested, with the Senate having little choice but to accept his accession. Yet, despite the formal recognition of his rule, Domitian's relationship with the Senate remained tense from the outset. His early life and years in the shadow of his father and brother played a crucial role in shaping the leader he would become. The sense of exclusion and the long-standing desire to assert his authority would define his reign. Unlike Titus, who had enjoyed the goodwill of the aristocracy, Domitian harbored a deep mistrust of Rome's elite, believing that their interests often ran counter to those of the emperor. This belief would manifest in his increasingly autocratic rule, setting him apart from his predecessors and establishing the foundation for the conflicts that would mark his time on the throne. As he assumed power, Domitian was determined to rule on his own terms. The frustrations of his youth, the lessons of political survival he had learned, and the ambitions he had long suppressed were now fully unleashed. Though he had been denied the military experience and administrative responsibilities that might have prepared him for rule in a conventional sense, his years of observation and strategic thinking had given him a unique perspective on governance. The empire, in his view, needed strong, centralized leadership, and he would be the emperor to provide it, regardless of the opposition he faced. When Titus died suddenly in 81 AD, the empire was thrown into a state of uncertainty. His reign had been short but well received, marked by his generosity in handling the aftermath of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and his management of Rome's recovery from the Great Fire. His unexpected death raised suspicions, with whispers of foul play circulating in political circles. Some suspected Domitian's involvement, given his long-standing exclusion from power and the clear advantage he gained from his brother's passing. However, no concrete evidence supported these claims, and whether Titus died of natural causes or was indeed a victim of intrigue remains a mystery. What is undeniable is that Domitian acted swiftly to secure his position. Unlike the more gradual transitions of power seen under previous emperors, his accession was immediate. There was no prolonged period of negotiation with the Senate, no carefully orchestrated approval process. He simply assumed the throne with absolute authority. The Senate, having little choice, recognized him as emperor, though many senators harbored deep reservations about his rise. Domitian wasted no time in consolidating power, taking firm control of the government and making it clear that he intended to rule differently than his father and brother. One of his first priorities was to establish a strong imperial presence. He adopted the title Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, signaling his belief in the divine nature of the emperor's authority. This was a departure from previous rulers who, while commanding great respect, had maintained a more cautious relationship with Rome's political traditions. Domitian's approach left little room for the Senate's influence. Unlike Vespasian and Titus, who had worked to maintain senatorial cooperation, he saw the institution as a threat to his power. He systematically reduced its role in governance, replacing many senators with equestrians, members of the Roman elite who were more dependent on the emperor and thus more loyal. His early policies focused on strengthening the empire's administrative and military structures. He increased the salaries of soldiers, ensuring their loyalty, and expanded the role of the Praetorian Guard, granting them greater privileges. The Praetorians, who served as the emperor's personal bodyguards, became a central pillar of his rule. Their support allowed him to exert control over the political landscape, deterring potential opposition from the Senate or other factions. He also took a direct interest in provincial governance, personally overseeing appointments to key administrative positions. In breaking away from Senate traditions, Domitian reshaped the nature of Roman rule. He preferred efficiency over diplomacy, favoring direct control over the empire rather than the power-sharing approach of his predecessors. He introduced a series of reforms aimed at improving administrative efficiency and financial stability. One of his most significant financial measures was the revaluation of the Roman currency. He increased the silver content of the denarius, stabilizing the economy and restoring confidence in Rome's monetary system. This move, though beneficial to the economy, further cemented his reputation as a ruler who acted independently, without seeking approval from traditional governing bodies. Domitian's focus on centralization extended beyond financial policy. He reformed the legal system, increasing the emperor's role in judicial matters. Unlike earlier emperors, who often deferred to senatorial courts, he took a more direct approach in legal proceedings, personally presiding over cases and issuing rulings. This was part of his broader effort to consolidate imperial authority, ensuring that justice was administered according to his vision rather than being influenced by the aristocracy. One of the defining features of his rule was his increasing reliance on the Praetorian Guard. Recognizing the importance of military support, he strengthened their position within the imperial structure. He appointed loyal commanders to key positions, ensuring that the Guard remained firmly under his control. This reliance on the military came at the expense of the Senate, further alienating Rome's aristocracy. While previous emperors had balanced senatorial influence with military loyalty, Domitian made it clear that his power was rooted in the support of the legions and the Praetorian Guard. Despite his autocratic tendencies, his reign was not without accomplishments. His administrative reforms improved the efficiency of provincial governance, reducing corruption and ensuring a more stable administration. He invested in infrastructure projects, commissioning the construction of new roads, aqueducts, and public buildings. These projects not only improved the quality of life in Rome but also reinforced his image as a capable ruler. However, his centralization of power and suppression of the Senate created growing resentment among the political elite. Many senators viewed him as a tyrant, accusing him of undermining Rome's republican traditions. His intolerance for opposition became increasingly apparent as he cracked down on perceived threats with brutal efficiency. He employed an extensive network of informants, using espionage and secret police tactics to monitor potential dissenters. Those suspected of conspiracy or disloyalty were swiftly executed or exiled. His relationship with the Senate deteriorated further as he became more reclusive, relying on a close circle of advisors and military officials rather than engaging with traditional governing bodies. He viewed the Senate not as a partner in governance but as an obstacle to his vision for Rome. His autocratic style, though effective in maintaining order, created deep divisions within the political landscape. As his rule progressed, his paranoia grew. The fear of assassination became an obsession, leading him to implement increasingly harsh measures against those he perceived as threats. Senators, equestrians, and even members of his own family fell victim to purges. His reliance on the Praetorian Guard intensified as he sought to insulate himself from potential conspiracies. Despite these tensions, he maintained control over the empire for more than a decade, demonstrating both administrative skill and political acumen. His rule was marked by stability and economic prosperity, even as his methods became more ruthless. However, the very forces that sustained his power, the military and the Praetorian Guard, would ultimately play a role in his downfall. His vision for Rome was one of absolute authority, where the emperor was the supreme figure in both governance and military affairs. While his policies strengthened the empire in many ways, his suppression of the Senate and increasing reliance on repression created an environment of fear and distrust. His legacy would be shaped not only by his accomplishments but also by the lasting impact of his authoritarian rule. Domitian's reign was defined by his relentless focus on military campaigns and border security, a reflection of his vision for Rome as a powerful, well-defended empire. Unlike some of his predecessors who had relied on diplomacy and strategic alliances, he believed in direct military intervention to safeguard and expand Rome's frontiers. His campaigns, however, were not always successful, and his military legacy remains a subject of debate. His most significant conflicts were with the Dacians, Germanic tribes, and the northern territories of Britain and Gaul, while his broader defense strategy focused on reinforcing Rome's borders and maintaining stability within the empire. One of the most pressing military challenges of his reign was the conflict with the Dacians, a formidable enemy under the leadership of King Decebalus. The Dacians, based in the region of modern-day Romania, posed a persistent threat to Rome's northern frontier. Their mountainous homeland provided them with a natural defense, and their warriors were known for their resilience and tactical cunning. By the time Domitian came to power, Rome had already struggled to subdue the Dacians, and their raids into Roman territory continued to destabilize the region. Determined to assert his authority and secure Rome's borders, he launched military expeditions against them. However, these campaigns proved far more difficult than anticipated. The Roman legions faced harsh terrain and an enemy that excelled in guerrilla warfare. Domitian's forces suffered notable setbacks, and despite his efforts, he was unable to achieve a decisive victory. After years of costly engagements, he ultimately chose a different approach. He negotiated a peace treaty with Decebalus. The terms of this treaty were controversial, as it involved Rome providing financial subsidies and military support to the Dacians in exchange for peace. While this agreement allowed Rome to focus its resources elsewhere, it was seen as a humiliation by many within the empire. Critics argued that Rome should have crushed the Dacians instead of effectively paying them to remain at peace. This arrangement later backfired when Decebalus used Roman funds to strengthen his military, leading to renewed conflicts after Domitian's death. Alongside the Dacian Wars, Domitian also focused on Rome's western and northern frontiers, particularly against the Germanic tribes. The Chatti, a powerful Germanic group, frequently threatened the Roman provinces along the Rhine. They launched raids into Roman territory, testing the empire's defenses. Recognizing the strategic importance of securing this frontier, Domitian personally led military campaigns against them. His approach combined direct military action with strategic fortification efforts. The legions fought a series of engagements against the Chatti, pushing them back and demonstrating Rome's military superiority. In addition to these battles, he reinforced the Rhine frontier by constructing fortifications and strengthening the presence of Roman legions in the region. His strategy was not merely about winning battles but ensuring long-term stability. He expanded the system of limes, or fortified frontiers, which served as defensive barriers against external threats. These fortifications were crucial in maintaining Roman control over contested areas and deterring further invasions. His investment in border defenses would have lasting effects, as the limes became a key feature of Roman military strategy for centuries to come. While Domitian was directly involved in military campaigns against the Dacians and Germanic tribes, his influence also extended to Britain and Gaul. In Britain, Roman expansion had been ongoing since the reign of Claudius, with legions gradually pushing further north. While Domitian did not personally lead campaigns there, he played a role in supporting the northern expansion efforts. The governor of Britain, Agricola, conducted military operations deep into Caledonia, modern Scotland, securing important victories and expanding Roman influence. However, Domitian's priorities lay elsewhere, and he ultimately recalled Agricola, possibly fearing that his growing success would overshadow his own achievements. This decision marked the end of large-scale Roman expansion in Britain during his reign, as Rome shifted toward a more defensive posture in the region. In Gaul, Domitian's policies were aimed at maintaining stability rather than engaging in expansion. The Gallic provinces were critical to Rome's economy and military logistics, serving as a key link between the western and central parts of the empire. He implemented administrative reforms to strengthen Roman control and prevent unrest. Although Gaul was relatively peaceful during his reign, his policies ensured that the region remained firmly under Roman authority. Beyond individual campaigns, Domitian's military legacy was shaped by his broader reforms and strategic vision. He recognized that Rome's security depended not only on active military engagements but also on a well-organized and well-funded army. To achieve this, he increased soldiers' pay, ensuring their loyalty and improving their standard of living. This move was not just a gesture of goodwill. It was a calculated effort to secure the support of the legions, who were the backbone of imperial power. He also restructured the command system, appointing trusted generals to key positions and ensuring that military leadership remained firmly aligned with his rule. Unlike some of his predecessors who had faced challenges from ambitious generals, Domitian sought to maintain direct control over the military, reducing the risk of internal power struggles. His emphasis on discipline and efficiency helped strengthen the army, making it a more effective force for both defense and expansion. One of his most lasting contributions was the reinforcement of Rome's fortified frontiers. The limes system, which he expanded and strengthened, became a crucial component of Rome's defensive strategy. These fortifications were designed to serve as a first line of defense against external threats, allowing Rome to maintain its vast territories with a relatively stable military presence. By investing in these defenses, he sought to create a more secure and manageable empire. Despite his focus on military strength, his reign was not marked by grand conquests or major territorial expansions. His military policies were primarily defensive, aimed at securing Rome's existing borders rather than aggressively expanding them. This was in contrast to earlier emperors like Trajan, who pursued large-scale conquests. Domitian's approach was pragmatic. He understood the limitations of Rome's resources and chose to prioritize stability over risky expansionist ventures. However, his military achievements were often overshadowed by his political struggles. His conflicts with the Senate and his increasingly autocratic rule led to growing opposition within Rome. While his soldiers remained loyal to him, his reliance on military support over senatorial cooperation deepened the divide between him and the political elite. His focus on military authority ultimately contributed to his downfall, as discontent among Rome's aristocracy culminated in his assassination. In retrospect, Domitian's military legacy is complex. He was a ruler who understood the importance of Rome's military strength and worked to reinforce its borders, yet his campaigns often lacked the decisive victories that defined the reigns of other emperors. His emphasis on fortifications and disciplined legions helped maintain the stability of the empire, but his failure to achieve lasting success in Dacia and his controversial peace treaty with Decebalus tarnished his reputation. While his reign was marked by relative security, his methods and leadership style ensured that his military achievements were often overshadowed by the political turbulence of his rule. Domitian's reign was marked by an assertive domestic policy that sought to strengthen the empire's economic foundations, improve infrastructure, and ensure stability in both urban and rural areas. Unlike his predecessors who often prioritized military conquest over internal reforms, he took a hands-on approach to governance, paying close attention to financial management, public works, and agricultural stability. His policies reflected a vision of a well-ordered and efficiently run empire, where resources were meticulously allocated to ensure prosperity. However, his aggressive financial strategies, while effective in many respects, also contributed to resentment among the aristocracy and financial elites. One of the most critical aspects of his domestic policy was economic stability, a challenge that every emperor had to navigate. He inherited an empire that had been financially strained by the military campaigns of previous rulers, yet he was determined to restore fiscal balance while simultaneously funding ambitious projects. His approach to taxation was strategic. He sought to maximize revenue without overburdening the provinces. To achieve this, he implemented reforms that streamlined the collection process and reduced inefficiencies. Tax collection had long been plagued by corruption, as local governors and tax collectors often exploited the system for personal gain. By increasing oversight and holding officials accountable, he aimed to ensure that more revenue reached the imperial treasury rather than being siphoned off by corrupt administrators. Despite these reforms, his reign saw a significant increase in imperial expenditures, particularly in military funding and infrastructure development. He was acutely aware of the importance of a strong military, not just for defending Rome's borders but also for maintaining internal stability. Soldiers' salaries were increased, and additional funds were allocated for fortifications and military supplies. While this bolstered Rome's defenses and ensured the loyalty of the legions, it also placed a heavy burden on the treasury. To compensate, he sought alternative sources of revenue, including the confiscation of wealth from senators and wealthy elites accused of conspiracy or corruption. These actions, while effective in shoring up finances, further alienated the aristocracy and contributed to the tensions that would later define his rule. Beyond military expenditures, a significant portion of state funds was directed toward grand public works and infrastructure projects. He envisioned Rome as a city of unparalleled splendor and took it upon himself to restore and expand its architectural grandeur. Fires and earthquakes had left sections of the city in ruins, and he launched extensive rebuilding efforts to restore Rome to its former glory. His projects were not merely functional, they were designed to reflect the power and prestige of his reign. New temples were erected, forums were expanded, and roads were improved to facilitate trade and communication across the empire. Among his most notable projects was the completion of the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, a structure of immense religious and symbolic importance. The temple had been damaged during previous conflicts, and he saw its restoration as a testament to Rome's resilience. Additionally, he commissioned the construction of a massive palace complex, the Domus Augustana, which served as both his residence and a center of imperial administration. This palace, characterized by its opulence and grandeur, was a reflection of his vision of centralized authority. Infrastructure development extended beyond Rome itself. He understood that a well-connected empire was essential for economic prosperity and military efficiency. Roads were repaired and expanded, improving trade routes that facilitated the movement of goods and troops. Bridges and aqueducts were constructed to ensure the steady flow of water to urban centers, enhancing the quality of life for Roman citizens. These projects were not just displays of imperial wealth. They were practical measures that strengthened the empire's foundation and ensured its long-term stability. Another area of focus was agricultural reform, which was crucial for maintaining food security and supporting the vast population of the empire. Grain supply had always been a key concern for Roman rulers, as shortages could lead to unrest and instability. He implemented policies aimed at increasing agricultural productivity, encouraging investment in farming, and improving the distribution of grain. These measures ensured that Rome's food supply remained stable, preventing the kinds of shortages that had led to crises in earlier periods. His reforms extended to currency as well. The Roman monetary system had experienced fluctuations in value, particularly due to the debasement of currency by previous rulers. He sought to standardize the currency, ensuring that it maintained its value and credibility in both domestic and international trade. His efforts helped stabilize the economy and restore confidence in Roman coinage, which was essential for commerce and taxation. Despite his successes, his economic policies were not without controversy. His heavy-handed approach to financial management, particularly his aggressive taxation and confiscation policies, created tensions with the senatorial class. While his reforms were effective in strengthening the empire's economic foundation, they came at the cost of increasing resentment among Rome's elite. His focus on centralizing power and reducing senatorial influence meant that he faced significant opposition, which would ultimately contribute to the instability that led to his downfall. His domestic policies and economic reforms were instrumental in shaping the later years of the Roman Empire. While his reign was marked by political tensions and autocratic rule, his contributions to Rome's infrastructure, economy, and administrative efficiency left a lasting impact. His vision of a well-ordered, financially stable, and architecturally magnificent empire reflected his commitment to Rome's enduring strength. However, the very strategies that secured the empire's prosperity also fueled the dissatisfaction that would eventually lead to his assassination. Domitian's relationship with the Senate was defined by deepening tensions and a shift in power dynamics that placed the emperor at the center of governance while reducing the traditional influence of Rome's aristocratic elite. Unlike his predecessors, who had at least maintained the facade of senatorial cooperation, he openly distrusted the Senate and sought to sideline its authority. His governance style was autocratic, favoring efficiency and direct control over consensus building, which led to growing resentment among senators. This hostility was not immediate but developed gradually as he consolidated power and restructured the administration to align more closely with his vision of centralized rule. From the outset, his attitude toward the Senate was one of suspicion. He had spent much of his early life in the shadow of his father, Vespasian, and his older brother, Titus, both of whom had engaged with the Senate more diplomatically. However, upon ascending to the throne, he quickly moved to diminish the Senate's role in governance, relying instead on equestrians and other loyal officials who owed their positions directly to him. This shift reduced the Senate's ability to influence policy, making it clear that he saw the body as a relic of the past rather than an essential part of the empire's administration. His preference for direct control extended beyond mere governance. He took active steps to monitor and suppress potential threats among the senatorial class. He revived and expanded the use of informers, spies, and secret trials to identify dissenters, leading to a climate of fear within Rome's political circles. Senators who were suspected of disloyalty or opposition faced harsh consequences, ranging from exile to execution. This campaign of repression was justified under the pretense of maintaining order and security, but in practice, it served to eliminate any challenge to his authority. One of the most controversial aspects of his rule was the extensive use of treason trials, or maiestas cases, which became a tool for purging enemies and consolidating power. Accusations of conspiracy, whether real or fabricated, often resulted in swift and brutal punishments. Many prominent senators were executed, while others were forced to commit suicide. This period of political repression further alienated the aristocracy, reinforcing the perception of Domitian as a tyrant rather than a ruler concerned with the traditional balance of power. His control over officials extended beyond senators. Provincial governors and military commanders were closely monitored to ensure loyalty. He appointed individuals based on their allegiance to him rather than their standing within Rome's elite circles. This policy created a more efficient administration but also deepened the divide between the emperor and the senatorial class, who saw themselves being systematically excluded from meaningful roles in governance. His need for absolute control also manifested in his approach to censorship. Literary and philosophical works that criticized imperial authority or championed republican ideals were suppressed, and writers who spoke against him faced severe consequences. Poets and historians who once enjoyed relative freedom under earlier emperors found themselves navigating a precarious landscape where their words could be interpreted as seditious. Some chose self-imposed exile, while others tempered their work to align with the official narrative of his reign. In addition to political repression, he sought to establish his legacy through the elevation of his own image, fostering what became known as the Domitianic cult. The idea of emperor worship was not new. His predecessors had been deified after their deaths, but he took this concept further by actively promoting his own divinity during his lifetime. Statues and inscriptions depicted him as a divine ruler, and he encouraged ceremonies and rituals that reinforced his status as a semi-divine figure. This effort to solidify his authority through religious means was met with mixed reactions. While some regions of the empire embraced the practice, particularly in the provinces where imperial cults were already established, others, especially the senatorial class, viewed it as excessive and a sign of unchecked megalomania. His insistence on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, further highlighted his belief in the absolute nature of his rule. This title, which he expected to be used in formal settings, marked a departure from the more restrained titles adopted by previous emperors. While some officials and members of the public accepted this with deference, the Senate and traditional Roman elites saw it as an affront to the principles of the Republic, which still lingered in Rome's political consciousness. The Domitianic cult extended beyond Rome's borders. Temples were dedicated to him, and priesthoods were established to oversee rituals in his honor. In the eastern provinces, where ruler worship had a long history, these practices were more readily adopted, aligning with local traditions of deifying monarchs. In Rome itself, however, the emphasis on his personal divinity contributed to the growing unease among senators and intellectuals, who saw in him the embodiment of autocratic excess. Despite the resistance from certain factions, his efforts to reshape Rome's political and religious landscape had a lasting impact. His rule marked a significant transformation in the nature of imperial authority, moving it further away from the republican ideals that had once defined Rome and closer to a fully autocratic system where the emperor was the undisputed center of power. His ability to maintain control for as long as he did was a testament to his strategic governance, but the deep-seated animosity he cultivated among Rome's elite ultimately led to his downfall. His assassination was the culmination of years of political repression and senatorial resentment. In the end, the very tactics he used to consolidate power, spying, executions, and the exclusion of the Senate, created an environment in which his enemies could conspire against him. When he was finally overthrown, the Senate moved quickly to erase his legacy, condemning his memory in a practice known as damnatio memoriae. Statues were destroyed, inscriptions were defaced, and his name was removed from official records. However, despite this effort to obliterate his influence, his reign had already left an indelible mark on the empire, shaping the trajectory of Roman governance in ways that would be felt long after his death. Domitian's reign saw a profound transformation in the intellectual and religious landscape of Rome. His pursuit of absolute authority led him to view independent thought, especially that which questioned imperial power, as a potential threat. Philosophers, particularly those associated with Stoicism, were among his primary targets. The Stoics, who emphasized virtue, reason, and individual moral responsibility, often found themselves at odds with the emperor's autocratic rule. Many Stoic philosophers had been outspoken critics of earlier emperors, and under Domitian, their opposition became grounds for exile or execution. One of the most famous victims of this purge was Epictetus, a former slave-turned-philosopher whose teachings on inner freedom and self-discipline made him a revered figure. His ideas, emphasizing the supremacy of moral integrity over external power, stood in direct contrast to Domitian's style of governance. As a result, Epictetus and several other philosophers were banished from Rome, their teachings suppressed in an attempt to stifle ideological dissent. This broader suppression of intellectual freedom extended beyond philosophers to include historians and poets who dared to criticize the regime. Those who did not align their works with the emperor's vision faced censorship, exile, or worse. The arts and literature, which had flourished under previous emperors, now became instruments of propaganda. Writers who wished to continue their craft safely often resorted to veiled criticisms or shifted their focus to less politically sensitive subjects. In addition to targeting philosophers, Domitian also turned his attention to the Christian community, which was still in its formative years but growing steadily within the empire. The precise nature and extent of his persecution of Christians remain subjects of historical debate. Unlike later emperors, who explicitly targeted Christians in large-scale purges, Domitian's actions were less systematic but still marked by instances of repression. Some sources suggest that he viewed Christians with suspicion due to their refusal to participate in the state-sanctioned worship of the emperor. Their monotheistic beliefs, which rejected the divine status of the emperor, positioned them as potential subversives in his eyes. There are accounts that certain Christian leaders were executed under Domitian, although details remain scarce. The Book of Revelation, written around this period, is often interpreted as reflecting the persecution of Christians during his reign. Some traditions claim that he ordered the execution or exile of prominent Christian figures, including members of the imperial household who had converted. His insistence on emperor worship, combined with his intolerance for religious movements that did not conform to state ideology, likely made Christians particular targets of suspicion. While his persecution of Christians was not as intense as that of later emperors, it contributed to the community's growing narrative of martyrdom and resistance. As the years passed, Domitian's rule became increasingly marked by paranoia. His concentration of power had alienated many members of the Senate, and he became convinced that conspiracies against him were constantly in motion. He surrounded himself with spies and informers, using accusations of treason as a means to eliminate those he perceived as threats. His suspicion extended even to his own family, and those closest to him were not immune from his wrath. The execution of prominent senators and officials further deepened the atmosphere of fear that permeated his court. Many of those put to death were accused of plotting against him, though in many cases, the evidence was flimsy or fabricated. This growing climate of repression led to increasing dissatisfaction within the imperial court. The elite, weary of his tyranny, began to see his removal as a necessary step to restore stability. Among those implicated in the eventual conspiracy against him was his wife, Domitia Longina. Though once a close partner in his rule, tensions had developed between them, and she may have played a role in the plot to end his life. Other key figures involved included members of the Praetorian Guard and high-ranking officials who had once been loyal to him but had grown disillusioned with his rule. The conspiracy took shape in the shadows of the imperial palace. Given Domitian's constant surveillance and fear of betrayal, the plotters had to act with extreme caution. Eventually, they found an opportunity to strike. On September 18, 96 AD, Domitian was assassinated in his own palace. Accounts of his death vary, but the most widely accepted version suggests that he was lured into a trap by court officials and then stabbed multiple times by members of the Praetorian Guard. The attack was swift and brutal, ensuring that he had no chance to fight back or escape. His death sent immediate shockwaves through Rome. The Senate, which had long resented his rule, reacted with open relief. They quickly moved to condemn his memory, a practice known as damnatio memoriae, in which his name and likeness were systematically erased from public monuments and official records. Statues of him were destroyed, inscriptions were chiseled away, and attempts were made to erase his presence from Roman history. However, despite these efforts, his impact on the empire could not be fully erased. The public reaction to his assassination was mixed. While the senatorial class celebrated his downfall, segments of the military and the lower classes, who had benefited from his economic policies and public works projects, mourned his passing. His reign, though marked by tyranny, had also seen periods of relative stability and prosperity, particularly in terms of infrastructure and defense. His assassination marked the end of the Flavian dynasty, and Rome would soon transition to a new era under Emperor Nerva. Domitian's legacy remains a subject of debate among historians. While ancient sources, many of whom were written by his senatorial enemies, depict him as a ruthless tyrant, modern scholarship has re-evaluated aspects of his reign, recognizing his administrative efficiency and contributions to Rome's development. However, his relentless pursuit of absolute power, his persecution of perceived enemies, and his inability to balance autocracy with diplomacy ultimately sealed his fate. His downfall serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked authority and the perils of ruling through fear rather than consensus. Domitian's death marked not only the end of his rule but also the culmination of years of tension between the emperor and the Senate. The ruling elite, having long suffered under his oppressive policies, sought to eliminate his legacy in every possible way. The Senate immediately issued a damnatio memoriae, a formal condemnation that aimed to erase his memory from Roman history. His name was struck from inscriptions, his statues were defaced or destroyed, and his likeness was removed from public monuments. This systematic effort to erase him from history was unprecedented in its scale, reflecting the depth of animosity he had provoked among Rome's political class. Unlike other emperors whose deaths were met with mourning or at least respect, Domitian was treated as a ruler whose very existence needed to be forgotten. The destruction of his statues was particularly symbolic. Public monuments were essential in shaping an emperor's image, reinforcing his authority even after death. By dismantling these representations, the Senate aimed to obliterate any remnants of his reign. However, this erasure was not absolute. Many of the structures and reforms he had implemented remained standing, a testament to the complexity of his rule. While his name may have been removed from official records, his impact on the empire could not be entirely erased. Despite this official condemnation, the question of whether Domitian was truly a tyrant or merely a misunderstood ruler has been debated for centuries. Ancient sources, particularly those written by historians such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger, paint a highly negative portrait of his reign. These writers, who were deeply connected to the senatorial class, had personal and political reasons to depict him as a cruel despot. They highlighted his paranoia, his brutal suppression of opposition, and his self-indulgent behavior, portraying him as a ruler whose unchecked ambition led to widespread fear and repression. Suetonius, for example, described him as a depraved autocrat who relished in the suffering of his enemies, while Tacitus emphasized his hostility toward the Senate and his preference for ruling through force rather than diplomacy. However, modern historians have revisited Domitian's reign with a more nuanced perspective. While acknowledging his autocratic tendencies, scholars have also recognized his administrative efficiency and his contributions to the empire's stability. Unlike his predecessors, he did not tolerate corruption within the government, actively working to streamline bureaucracy and enforce stricter regulations on provincial governors. His judicial reforms, aimed at reducing abuses of power, demonstrated a commitment to justice, even if his methods were harsh. Additionally, his economic policies, particularly his efforts to stabilize the currency and manage taxation, helped maintain financial stability in the empire. His military policies further complicate his legacy. While ancient writers criticized his campaigns, particularly his failure in Dacia, modern analysis suggests that his defensive strategies were crucial in preserving Rome's borders. His efforts to fortify the frontier, particularly along the Rhine and Danube, laid the groundwork for the empire's long-term security. Unlike emperors who sought expansion at any cost, Domitian focused on consolidation, ensuring that Rome's territories were well defended and sustainable. This pragmatic approach, though not as celebrated as grand military conquests, played a crucial role in maintaining Rome's strength in the decades following his death. His impact on the Roman Empire extended beyond military and economic reforms. Domitian's centralization of power and emphasis on direct rule set a precedent for later emperors. While the Senate resented his autocratic tendencies, his model of governance became a template for future rulers, particularly during the later phases of the empire. His reliance on the Praetorian Guard as an instrument of control foreshadowed the increasing militarization of Roman politics, where emperors depended on their personal guards rather than the Senate for authority. Despite his unpopularity among Rome's elite, Domitian was not universally despised. The lower classes and the military, both of whom benefited from his policies, viewed him in a more favorable light. His public works projects, which included the construction of temples, roads, and entertainment facilities, contributed to the welfare of ordinary citizens. He also ensured that the grain supply remained stable, a crucial factor in maintaining peace within the empire. Many soldiers remained loyal to him, appreciating his efforts to improve military conditions and provide adequate pay. The contrast between elite disdain and popular support highlights the complexity of his reign. Unlike some emperors who were widely reviled, Domitian's rule was divisive rather than outright disastrous. His assassination, while welcomed by the Senate, was not necessarily a moment of triumph for the entire empire. Many of the issues that defined his reign, tensions between the emperor and the Senate, the role of the military in politics, and the struggle to balance autocracy with governance, persisted long after his death. In assessing his place among the Flavian emperors, Domitian stands apart from his father, Vespasian, and his brother, Titus. Vespasian was seen as a pragmatic ruler who restored stability after the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, while Titus, though ruling for a short period, gained widespread admiration for his generosity and his response to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Domitian, by contrast, ruled with a heavier hand, favoring efficiency over popularity. While his father and brother cultivated positive relationships with the Senate, Domitian's adversarial approach made him a permanent enemy of Rome's elite. His reign serves as a reflection of the broader evolution of Roman governance. While the early empire had attempted to maintain the illusion of senatorial involvement in decision-making, Domitian openly disregarded this pretense, ruling as a true autocrat. In many ways, his reign foreshadowed the shift toward a more openly imperial system, where the Senate's influence diminished and the emperor's authority became absolute. The debate over his role in Roman history remains unresolved. While ancient sources depict him as a ruthless tyrant, modern historians acknowledge his contributions to the empire's administration, economy, and military stability. His reign was not without its flaws. His paranoia, his brutal repression of opposition, and his alienation of the Senate ultimately led to his downfall. However, his impact on Rome's development cannot be dismissed. He was a ruler who prioritized efficiency and order, even at the cost of personal popularity. His legacy, though tarnished by damnatio memoriae, endures in the structures he built, the policies he implemented, and the precedents he set for future emperors.